Greetings, programs. This is Jay Mayer, the Tron Guy, and you're listening to the Scene World podcast.
It's the Scene World podcast. I'm AJ. He's Joerg. I'm eating chocolate cake for lunch because I'm an adult and I can do that.
Yeah. Nobody tells you what to do.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Joerg, well known for being well known. Well, yes, so today we are talking to the three leading figures of the MEGA65, which is pretty interesting because AJ actually mentioned in the last episode of our podcast that he would like to ask them some questions, so we did. Mm-hmm. And I hope you enjoy it.
We will shortly, anyway.
Yes. So
before we get going with that, there is some stuff that we can cover. First off, anyone that was tired of hearing us talk about Extra Life, too bad. We're going to talk about it again. We're taking part in it again in 2016, and so we have a new team for ourselves. We're not going to be part of someone else's team. So if you go to extra-life.org/team/sceneworld, you can find us, and you can donate and do all that fun jazz. Game night or game day, the 24-hour nonsense-a-thon that we do, isn't going to be until November, I think. So this is just the lead up to it. We'll be doing some stuff and leading up to it. Partially, part of which was we got to use our Twitch stream a couple weeks ago to do some live streaming of Commodore games, which was pretty fun.
Oh yes, we were talking about that month already, that we are planning to do something with it, and now we did, and we had Live Bloomsquist invited, who did NetRacer and Vortex 2, and we had over an hour of fun and a lot of feedback and participation in the chat from the community, so thank you for that. Also thanks to Bill Hurd for promoting it on his Facebook, which helped us a lot, and it really surprised me because I didn't ask him to, but the general feedback was so good in the beginning that we are crazy to do that. Yes, and we did. And also thanks to Kevin Castiles, our hardware beta tester guy, who actually got a network interface card, a NIC, especially for this event. So it was a lot of fun. And you can watch it afterwards because we made a recording, and we will put the link in the description down there.
It's on YouTube, so it's on our channel on YouTube. Next time that we do this, it's going to be me destroying Joerg in Pit Stop 2.
Yes, yeah. Because we will use the netplay function in Vice.
We'll try to use the netplay function in Vice. I don't guarantee that anything's going to work. We'll attempt it.
Well, the good thing is that we are all geeks, and in the end, we all figured it out in one way or another. We never had the case that we had to say, sorry guys, we have to abort. Fortunately, that never happened, and I hope it never will. So, what other news we have?
Well, speaking of YouTube, we have another video up on YouTube as of today, which is the review of the Commodore PET. Joerg did an unboxing of it a couple weeks ago, and then he sent it to me, and I used it for a couple of weeks and played around with it, and my review is up there. I'm not going to say anything about what my opinions are. You're going to have to go and look at it.
Right. So
that's,
other news.
That's on YouTube, so people can see that.
Yeah.
Other news.
Yes, we finally made our page being moved to scene.org. So thanks to scene.org, to the International Scene Organization again, for hosting us and providing us the space and all the support. Really awesome. So thanks for that. And we made the switch to the servers without any downtime, so nobody noticed a thing. Yes.
Yeah.
And we are actually improving. We actually will be improving the homepage. We had some discussion today with the ModX developer to improve our page. So hopefully within the next few weeks, you will see a way better, more accessible homepage. Hopefully, yes. Yeah. What other news we have?
Oh, here's one. A video game con that I went to last year is the Video Game Con 2016 has been announced.
Wow.
It'll be taking place September 10th and 11th at the same place, the Parsippany PAL in Parsippany, New Jersey. So tickets are available. Go on Facebook, find them, or go on to their website. It's a videogamecon.com, and get tickets, register to go, check it out, all that stuff. Nothing really substantial has been said about it as far as who's going to be there and what's going to be happening.
You will be there.
Yeah, I'll be there. Yes, but so that's that's that going on.
So HA will be there again.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get your hand stamped.
Mm-hmm.
Did actually anybody want it?
No,
your hand
wanted.
Stamped?
Nobody wanted their hand.
Nobody
stamped.
wanted that.
I don't even know where I put it. It's somewhere around here.
Oh, okay. So leave that then.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, so we got some Kickstarter news. There's the story of the Oliver twins book by Chris Wilkins, and there was this problem of not being certain on which kind of NES systems their latest game would work. So I volunteered as a beta tester, and he just announced yesterday that they figured out that it works on NTSC machines, but not on European machines, which is quite interesting because it's a British game. So, and he announced that, well, according to my suggestion, they will put in a menu at the beginning where you can switch between PAL and NTSC, because the PAL and NTSC detection on the NES doesn't work properly. So the game was stuck on NTSC even on the PAL machines.
Okay.
So I volunteered to help out there. So this issue is being resolved, and every backer will get a cartridge that works on all versions, except those who wrote to him in that comment section on the update that they want an NTSC version. Then they get the NTSC version. So we will link to that so people can see that. Yes. So the other news actually is that there is a project from a Brazilian studio that's actually making a new version of Outrun called Slipstream, and that was successfully funded.
Oh yeah,
that's pretty neat. Yeah. Yes, and I was one of those early backers who actually backed the pledge to be a character in the game.
Oh boy!
So I will be a character in the game. No details known yet, but I will be a character in the Outrun PC remake. Okay. That's kind of exciting because I love racing games, and this is why I will beat HA in Pit Stop 2. By the way, yeah, yes. So far about the Kickstarter related news. Any other news you picked up? More than 2 items of news?
Not really. Hey, does your power supply for your Commodore hum or buzz?
No.
No? Huh.
No, because I use a PC power supply.
Oh, okay.
A modified one.
Oh, one you.
But even the PAL one didn't buzz. No.
Huh. Well, mine just makes a slight little hum to it, and I seem to remember old ones doing that, but I don't.
Yeah, but it's not really dangerous. It's quite normal.
So it's supposed to.
The very old ones could do that, yeah,
okay.
because of the way it's done. Even modern power supplies do that sometimes. Yeah.
Okay.
Except if the tone gets higher and louder over time, then it will probably burn through.
Oh, great.
After a while. So if you notice that the sound is changing, then you better replace
my very first C64. The power supply was it was overheating, and it would get to a certain point, and then everything would just turn off because it was just getting too hot for it. And I remedied this by taking it and putting it into like a freezer bag and then submerging that in ice water, and that worked for like 2 years.
Whoa. Actually, they made a newer version of the power supply not having that problem, and it has a sticker on it that says high pot tested. So, and even those power supplies work on the super CPU.
Okay.
So CMD always said if you use a super CPU, get a high pot tested power supply. It's a red sticker on the downside of the power supply.
Yeah, well, that was the 64. It was getting old. That's why it was overheating. This one here that I got, the 128, that's just hasn't been used in a while, and I didn't remember it making noise. I plugged it in, and I'm like, is that a hum coming from that thing? And I'm listening to it. I'm like, yeah, it is, but I haven't been able to test.
Maybe you have bees.
What's that?
Maybe you have bees, humming bees.
Yeah. I haven't been able to test it yet. I've got a cable for it, but the cable apparently is S-video, and then there's 2 audio cables. So the little thing I got to plug it in is only 2 RCA cables, so I haven't been able to try it yet. I got another cable coming to me.
Well, for the C128, for the 8 columns mode, you need a special cable.
I'm not even thinking about 80 columns at the moment. I'm just worried about the 40.
Just saying you need a special cable for that. But that is also available on eBay. And also it came with the C128 by default.
Yeah.
Because it was a special cable.
Well, it's not a special cable. It's just a DB9.
Yeah, but back then it was special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The hard part is finding something to plug it into now.
Right. Okay. Yes, another news is
yes.
that I got some calendars, some spare calendars too, actually.
Oh, yes, you did.
From the Women of Gaming 2015,
yep.
Where there is all those famous video game girls like Vanessa Ortega that we spoke to recently.
People can't see, but he's got all 3 on the wall behind him.
Yeah. So you can get 2 signed ones. This will be like a prize giving thing. If you just send us your feedback to the podcast, to the magazine.
Why don't I get a signed
whatever. Well, sure. I didn't offer it to you because you said, "What would I want to do with the outdated car?"
I got nothing. I got no use for it. I'm just.
You got the phone to review, isn't that good?
Yeah. I got the Commodore phone. Yeah. That'll be the last
we're actually the first person in America getting the hands up
that I know of, anyway. And that was kind of fun too, because I went to the store. I got the thing, and the first thing I did was go to the store to get an SD card for it, because if I'm going to be taking pictures and videos and doing stuff with it, I wanted to be able to keep it on something that I could get at. And I went into the store, and I went to the electronics section and grabbed an SD card, and of course the employee has to ask, can I help you with anything? And I said, no, I'm just getting an SD card for this phone. And he came over and he's like, well, what kind of phone is it? And so I pulled it out and showed it to him, and he was like, I've never seen that before. I'm like, yeah, well, it's, you wouldn't have. It's a European phone, but it's really, kind of a Chinese phone. But he started talking about it, and then someone else was walking past, and they happened to notice the big old Commodore logo on it, and it was like, wait a minute, does that say Commodore? And I said, yeah, and before long, there was like 5 or 6 people standing around in a semicircle looking at this thing that I'm holding and asking questions about it, and so that was kind of different.
Yeah. Right.
That's the one. I guess that's one of the benefits of having it is that other people that have the phone, if they're if you happen to bump into them, it's going to be like, hey, pet phone.
like you said in your review video with the cheap guys.
Yeah, I acknowledge you.
Yeah, I acknowledge you. Right. So, guys, once again, if you want to have a calendar, there are tools available. Just send us your feedback to podcast@sceneworld.org, and then
It's signed. Who's it signed by?
Anybody who's in the calendar.
Everyone in the calendar signed it?
Yeah.
So who would that be?
Let's see. Okay, so Miss January is Vanessa Ortega.
Yes, who we spoke to.
Yes. Miss February.
That's this month.
Is
last year.
Kelly Miss Violence.
Miss what?
Miss Violence.
Violence? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, all right.
And March is Lindsay Kingcray.
Okay.
April is Kat Gunn. May is Raquel Moore. June is Kimmy Pritt. July is Celeste Anderson. And August is Jessica Hurt. And September is Candy Keene. And October is Christy Pride. November is Luna Laney. December is Britt Brombacher. Oh yeah, Britt Brombacher. I know her. She's among my Facebook friends. Hi, Britt. Right. So two of them.
Yeah. So if you send feedback, we'll select at random.
Exactly.
2 people to send signed 2015 calendars to.
Yes. And of course, if you are elected, I will send you a reply and ask for your postal address because you would like to have this thing physically as addressed and sent to you.
Yes.
In a nice envelope.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Good. There is you get your personal piece of Scene World participation.
Yeah.
We didn't actually do a prize giving since the last 12 years, so
yeah, we did one.
You never know
ago where we sent a signed disc sleeve, I think.
Yeah, so you never know when the next prize giving is. So take your chance, take part. Yeah, and get your piece of gaming history.
Yeah. So we got the guys from the MEGA65 waiting. So let's pop over to there.
So today we are interviewing the MEGA65 guys, and that would be Detlef Hastik, who is the main organizer of the group, if I'm not mistaken.
Kind of the project manager. I fear, yeah.
Okay. And then we got Andre Kudra, who is doing public relation, kind of, right?
True.
And Paul Gardner-Stephen, who is doing the code, kind of, the main coder. So great to talk to you. So let's first start, I guess, with what is the MEGA64 actually about?
Well, actually, let's preface that before we get into that. Let's go back and explain a little bit about what the C65 is, because there may be 2 or 3 people listening that don't actually know what the 65 was.
Yeah, sure. So the C65 was this successor project to the Commodore 64 that Commodore were working on between about 1989 and 1991. And this was when Commodore were making the Amiga 600 and 1200, and someone in Commodore decided that it would be nice to try and get, I guess, one last bang out of the 8-bit era. And so they started working on this project. And yeah, I guess it was canned, it seems, a few weeks before it would have been ready for commercial release. Some prototype units have been sent out to game houses already to work on. And yeah, more or less finished prototypes existed. It was quite an interesting kind of mix of 8-bit and Amiga type technology. So it has bit planes like an Amiga. In fact, it has 8-bit planes like an Amiga 600 or 1200. 4096 colors, stereo SIDs. The CPU is about 4 times faster than on the Commodore 64. And what else did it have? a nice keyboard with real cursor keys for 4 directions.
Built-in floppy.
Internal 3.5-inch floppy drive. So yeah, really it was quite an upgrade in a lot of ways. But at the same time, in particular things like the bitplane implementation were quite restrictive. So you couldn't change the start address of the bitplane, so they weren't very good for big scrolling, and you only had 128 kilobytes of RAM. So I think that these were sort of some factors that contributed to eventually Commodore deciding not to release it, that it really wasn't going to be able to rejuvenate the market in the way that they had hoped. And maybe they were afraid of it competing with the Amiga as well.
Now, was that the actual case, that it was scrapped because of that, or because what I had always heard, what I always thought of it was that they were working on it and then they went bankrupt and then it just kind of got sold off, auctioned off during their liquidation.
No. So Commodore didn't go bankrupt until 94. So remember, this was being developed at the same time that the Amiga 600 and 1200 were developed, and they made it to market. And so it could have been pushed out to market at the same time. And partly, I think, 1991, an 8-bit computer wasn't going to fare that well in the market. But also, there were a few unfortunate design decisions, I think, that contributed to that. So in particular, the bit planes just weren't flexible enough to be really interesting and useful. So when you have a CPU which is only 3.5 megahertz and having to do more work with the bit planes than what an Amiga 500 would have had to have done. Because in the Amiga 500 or any Amiga, you could change the start address of the bit plane so that you can do this kind of nice full screen scrolling, and you can have separate play fields moving around. Whereas on the Commodore 65, the start address for the bit planes was more or less fixed on 8 kilobyte boundaries. So you could display pretty pictures, and you could display pretty pictures.
Yeah, maybe we could point out what is so interesting about the C65. Because it's not just a number that tells us that it's a follow-up to the C64, but also the hardware is designed in a way that it's downwards compatible. And basically the 4510 CPU includes the whole 6510 CPU from the C64, but all the illegal or empty opcodes are filled with quite interesting, nice ones for an 8-bit CPU. And the same is for the video chip, which is meant to be downwards compatible. And it also has 2 SIDs.
And that was a thing with Commodore, is that they had done a lot of different 8-bit machines, and the ones that were compatible, pretty much everything had to be C64 compatible, because when they made the Plus 4, it tanked because it couldn't do anything that the 64 could do. When they made the 16, that tanked. Everything they did that was 8-bit tanked because it couldn't handle 64 stuff, except for the 128, which had the built-in 64 mode and was pretty much 100% compatible with it.
And that's a really interesting point, because the 128 was commercially, well, like from an end user perspective, was the success story because it was backward compatible. But in a funny kind of way, actually really contributed to Commodore's demise, because unfortunately it had a profit margin of about 3 cents compared to the C64, where the production cost was, I think, down to $30 toward the end of things. So in terms of developing profit for Commodore, the 128 really was quite a poisoned apple for them. But so in the 65, they'd kind of learned from these various lessons. So the 65 was designed to be cheap to manufacture and backward compatible. And on a cost side, I think probably they succeeded. I mean, it was the Rev 2A boards, which are the main ones that most of the prototypes were made, were already looking reasonably cheap to manufacture. And I think the Rev 5 boards had even consolidated that further. And of course, 128K of RAM was quite cheap by 1991. So I think they would have succeeded there. Unfortunately, the backward compatibility had a bit of a wrinkle in it. So the VIC-3 video chip actually was not too bad in terms of backward compatibility. All the official modes of the C64 were well supported, and I'm not aware of any bugs in that. Of course, strange demo effects maybe would work or maybe wouldn't work because the timing of the chip was quite different. So from memory, there are no bad lines on the VIC-3 chip because it has enough bandwidth to do all the modes without impinging on the CPU. So this is kind of a nice step forward. Unfortunately, there's one tiny little CPU from the perspective of a C64 that stops quite a lot of things working. And together with removing the illegal opcodes, which as Detlef has discovered as we've been trying to find games that will run on the 65, a lot of the depackers use some illegal opcodes to make the depacker faster. But that can be worked around, and people could repack the games, and most of the games themselves don't need the illegal opcodes.
Well, except Test Drive and stuff, who relied on Test Drive 2 was a famous option, because Test Drive 1 actually worked on a super CPU, but Test Drive 2 didn't because it used illegal opcodes.
Yeah, and so there are naturally exceptions, but in general, most games once loaded didn't need to use illegal opcodes. However, the raster interrupt clearing thing that most coders used was, you would do increment D019 or decrement D019 or ASL D019. You do one of these read, modify, write instructions on D019. And a lot of people didn't realize, but this worked because those instructions read the original value from that location, write the original value back, and then do the operation and write that value back. But it's this unintended writing back of the original value that actually clears the raster interrupt. And on the 65, they had optimized this away in the CPU because it was based on a 65CE02, not on a 6502. And so this one thing alone stopped many games and other software from working. And it was a little bit hard to patch because you only had 3 bytes to, in the code of the increment instruction or something like that. And it had to happen within 5 cycles, so you couldn't even change it to a JSR, to some little routine that does an instruction which is safe. And this really was a big problem for getting just about anything to work. In fact, of existing games on the 65.
So this didn't actually emulate it in the same way that, say, like the 128 did, where it was really kind of.
Okay, so the issue is that the 128 CPU, in fact, is a 6502 with the extra I/O ports and funny stuff. The C65 has a 4502, which is in fact a slightly souped up 65C02. So the illegal opcodes were all allocated to things, and they had re-engineered it to be faster. So no ops and other 1-byte instructions take 1 cycle on the 65 CEO2, which is really nice, right? And they optimized this extra cycle out of the read, modify, write instructions, so they're faster too. Unfortunately, it turned out that it's quite vital for, as I say, for many Commodore 64 games. So one of the first things that I did when designing the CPU for the MEGA65 was to make sure that when you are doing these read, modify, write instructions, in fact, specifically on D019, it goes, you want to do something with clearing raster interrupts. And so it puts the dummy write back in, but only for that location, so that we get this nice combination of improved speed, but also maintaining compatibility.
Now, the MEGA65, this isn't. It's not. You're not making a C65 in that you're producing a replica or whatever. This is a machine that is essentially like a programmable board that you can use ROM images and whatnot to. It's similar to sort of the C1, I guess, that Jerry Ellsworth did a while back. Correct?
Kind of. I think, and maybe Detlef will want to jump in on this as well. From our perspective, we are making a replica enhanced Commodore 65. the fact that we don't have billions of dollars to run a chip fab to get our own chips fabbed means that we do have to use FPGAs, as the C1 did, to achieve that. But what we're producing is something that when you look at it from the outside, you're going to think, hey, where did someone get $40,000 to buy themselves a Commodore 65 from? It will look almost completely identical to an original Commodore 65. And indeed, the prototypes we have now, if you stayed a meter away, you'd have a hard time picking it out. In fact, when Detlef uploaded one of the new pictures of the second prototype recently, someone said, "Oh, that's not really one of your prototypes. You've just taken a picture of a real Commodore 65 to make it look like you've done a whole pile of progress." So when people start not being able to tell that you've made it yourself, this is success. And so we're quite happy with our progress in that direction, I think.
Yes, I think we are trying to make, on the one hand, the collectors happy, which basically they want a C65 in their collection, but they probably also want to use it. So we are trying to finish the work that Commodore stopped. And we got the approval of many of the old Commodore staff and of the original developers, and they helped us quite a lot already. So, well, at the moment, we really did like an exact replica. And from this point, we are enhancing it. On the hardware FPGA side, it's already enhanced. And for the case and all the parts you can touch, it will be very carefully be enhanced from this point. We try to avoid changing it on the first hand, because then it would be something that would just be made or thought up by us. We wanted to continue what they started because we think it's a really clever idea. And if you do code on it, if you code assembler, you will like it a lot because, if you like the C64, because you have something like a C64 on steroids, and this also, already applies for the C65, and the MEGA65, of course, can even do more. So what I did when I did some code on it, I ported my old C64 stuff and then enhanced it to use the VIC-3, so use C65 stuff, and afterwards I made use of the new MEGA65 function. So it's really a lot of fun to code, I think, for homebrew developers, for demo sceners, for anyone who is interested in the history of computing and in 8-bit in general.
So what you're trying to do is to create a new community, like it happened with the DTV, where there were suddenly patched games for the DTV and more demos using like the 64 color mode of the DTV and stuff, so that there are more softwares available for users, kind of.
Yeah, that's one of the ideas, to really create a new old school platform, which is, of course, a really high goal, because we don't know if people will accept it as an old school platform. But regarding the 8-bit, it is really old school, and we try to do everything in a way that Commodore would have done it also. Not to be too fancy, to do trickery or modern stuff that is not usable from the 8-bit code, etc. We are really discussing every new feature, and we are doing very, very careful modifications to the original design if necessary. The goal is to make all the communities happy, not only people that are interested in the platform it will become, or it already is, but also the collectors, also the C64 scene, demo scene, etc.
Now, see, that's kind of a thing that is interesting to me, because a valuable current replacement for a lot of hardware doesn't really exist. Machines are getting older and older, and things are stopping. Things don't work anymore, and you get things like the 64 Reloaded, which is a new board for it, but you still need to rely on 30, 35-year-old chips to fit in there to run it. And so it's while it's a good thing to be able to have it as a modern, a brand new sort of thing that you could get and use instead of, you know, your aging machine or your broken thing, there really isn't anything that addresses that.
Yeah, right.
No, and I think you're spot on there. And so we are trying to do that so that, you know, I guess, you know, our end goal is that, you know, the wives and partners of geeks might decide that, hey, like, you know, I'm going to give my loved geek, you know, an 8-bit computer for Christmas like they like to play with, and that it will come, you know, complete in the nice cardboard sleeve with the bright graphics, and, you know, it will be Christmas like it's 1985 all over again. So if we can create that moment for people, then we will be really happy, and something that they will continue to, you know, to go and use for many years. And as you say, you know, the all new construction so that it can last. Because really, as you say, the only other alternative is to combine something like the reloaded 64 with newly fabricated chips. The challenge is try to find a chip foundry that can produce 1 micron CMOS or NMOS. As it turns out, there is one, and I have spoken to them a little bit. And maybe another project another day will be to you know, get, for example, real SID chips remanufactured, because if we're successful with the MEGA65, we may well need to get new SID chips so that everyone can have real hard SIDs in the device. But that will be something for us to look to somewhat later down the track. But
well, it's an interesting topic, because the chips are even faked nowadays by Chinese manufacturers, because they figured out they can make money by it, selling it for 50 euros or something, which is something that you need to have for certain revisions actually of the SID chip nowadays, because they are so rare. So I see the point in remanufacturing the thing, and especially because I hear from all over the place that making new SID chips and 100% compatible clones is really very hard.
Yeah, it is. So this is actually the one piece in the MEGA65 in terms of the VHDL code, which I haven't written, was the SID chips, because I just got like, oh, this is too hard. And so I found the guy who had written the SID chip implementation, I think, which is in, I can't remember, it was in one other open source C64 project. And so I got in contact with him, and we have his kind permission to include his work. Wow. And this is quite technical DSP code. You have the digital synthesis side. This is the easy bit, and then trying to, in digital logic, implement the analog filters. This gets a little bit interesting. And he's done quite a good job, but for many things it sounds really good. But to get this totally perfect is really very hard.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to what AJ said. I think you really hit the nail on the head, because Mega as a community, we are trying to preserve artifacts of our digital history. And it's really not just about emulating stuff, because anyone can emulate anything on his super fast PC. We believe that it's really important to get the haptics right, to really be able to touch the machine. Yeah, if you use a C64, it's really about feeling the keyboard, and you have these original joysticks, and it's completely different to use it on a tube TV than to emulate it in a window on your PC and use the cursor keys. So we believe that what we are doing is a step towards preservation of our digital history, and to make things that are either dead because the chips are too old, or they are not available anymore, or they never came out, like the C65. We want to have people be able to feel them, try them, touch them, and that's I think why Mega got involved in this whole thing.
Yeah, and also talking about communities from our perspective, we see that a lot of people are getting more interested in the what we call retro computing world, right? So we see that people that are our age or even younger try to get interested in these kind of technologies in the early days technology. And for those, obviously the hardware is in the old sense affordable. But if we give them a platform that's even capable of doing newer stuff, then they will be interested even more. And I think that's also a great advantage of the MEGA65.
Of course, you can just play all your C64 games on your big TV if you really like to, which is just a small part of what it can do. But I mean, it's not the worst.
Right. Now does this have, because the original 65 and the 64 and everything else had it had the normal 64 serial ports on the back for plugging in disk drives and this and that. Does this have the same ports? Can I take like a 1581 and plug it into the back of this thing and go with it?
That is exactly what we're planning to do. In fact, unlike the 65, it's quite funny. As we've been discussing the various ports and connectors and things that we need, so certainly having a serial disk drive port is for us is non-negotiable. You will be able to plug your 1541 or 1581 in the back and use that to transfer data. And again, from a preservation perspective, this is actually really important for us, that people can easily get and protect their data. But also, unlike the 65, we'll probably also have a tape port so that you can still plug your old data set in and get games off of tape and various other things. And I mean, it also makes it, we're thinking about creative things with that, where you may well be able to make mixtapes directly from the MEGA65, recording physically onto an audio cassette. So there's a whole kind of interesting things that we're looking at there by having the original ports with their original function, but again, also this idea that when you want to use them in a little bit enhanced way, that this is also possible.
So, I was looking at some videos that had been put up about things being done with it, and not knowing too much about the hardware side of it, I noticed that a lot of the things, there were some demos that showed a ton of different colors on the with raster bars and stuff, but they all seem to be loading up in 64 mode. Is that like an expanded 64 mode, or how does that work exactly?
Okay, so this is a really useful question to bring up. So on the 65, unlike on the 128, from 64 mode, you can get access to all of the hardware. There is a special knock, so you have to write two particular values to D02F, and then the VIC2 switches to VIC3 mode, and you can see all the extra I/O registers and all the register mapping for everything else comes into view. And the memory mapping is done by a special opcode on the CPU. So there's this map instruction, 5C in hex, that lets you pick whatever you want to map in from the 1 megabyte address space to be visible in the 64 kilobyte memory space. So that combination of things means that you can, from 64 mode, do whatever you want to. And just partly out of sheer familiarity and comfort, we tend to code our stuff so the data's in 64 mode, and then turns on which features it needs and does what it wants to do. So of course on the MEGA65 we've extended that further so that you have it powers up in C64 mode. You can turn on C65 mode if you want to, and the VIC3, and then separately you can turn on MEGA65 mode and the VIC4, so that you have the full scope of capabilities available to you. And then to complement that, we also have the means where you can change whether the CPU runs at the realistic speed, so 1 megahertz in 64 mode. So the 65 has a register to control between 1 and 3.5 megahertz mode, and then we have separate control so that you can turn on the full 48 megahertz mode, where things really fly. So the MEGA65 in full speed mode will basically do in 1 second what a Commodore 64 takes 1 minute to compute normally. In fact, the MEGA65 is in full speed mode is so fast that I think you would have considerable difficulty emulating it at full speed on a modern computer precisely.
Maybe it's
But
interesting to tell that the games that you saw in the videos, they are all running in full speed 48 megahertz mode. And it's just a selection of games that are, well, let's call them so well coded that they don't have any problems with the CPU being 48 times faster.
Yeah, actually it's true. I noticed that when you had the super CPU, you had to fix games to run on a certain speed, otherwise it would run too fast, like Mercenary, for example.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's not that many games which run too fast. Anything which has a raster interrupt to drive the display and game logic will run at the correct speed, because you still only have some number of frames per second.
But it's interesting, for example, Test Drive, to use that example again, it played faster on a super CPU, but not too fast. So,
you're right. The same is for Thrust, for example. The physics simulation is a lot better, and the game plays the same, but with better physics.
Yeah, because often they would have maybe they're using real time or raster interrupt to do the redisplay with double buffering. And so in that case, whereas it might take 2 frames or 3 frames to recalculate, that suddenly this can happen in a tenth of a frame, and so every frame it can work. And so it's actually been really interesting. I think there's maybe a doctorate for someone who is interested in this sort of digital archaeology and heritage, to look at the different ways that these things were made, because as you say, it turns out that in many cases. It's all kind of fine. But this separately actually reminds me of a point that we didn't cover off earlier, that the MEGA65 is still actually completely 8-bit. So all the internal data paths are still 8-bit. Sure, the chip RAM has a 192 megahertz interface for the VIC-4, but it's still an 8-bit interface. So we've tried to really keep the purity of this as an 8-bit platform, whereas I think even like the DTV and the Chameleon, from memory, both use wider data buses to the memory to try and get some performance.
And the Chameleon, you are referring to the cartridge from Jens Schoenfeld.
Correct. Yeah, which is, this is some fantastic work that they've done there. It's really nice. It's the nearest competitor in some ways to the MEGA65 in terms of performance, but we're still something like easily double the speed. And again, from memory, the Chameleon 1 and the DTV, when you run them at full speed, you no longer have cycle predictability for the performance, because it's using like SD RAM or DDR RAM, and you have all of this. The memory accesses stop it feeling, to me anyway, completely like an 8-bit machine, whereas on the MEGA65, the RAM is all zero weight state 8-bit RAM. And so you can sit down and look at a routine and go, this will complete in 43 cycles, like you should be able to on any real 8-bit machine. So again, I think for the demo scene community and all of this kind of thing, there's some of these little things that nonetheless make a big difference to how 8-bit the machine feels.
Now, speaking of speed and well, especially like the demo scene and whatnot, does this run as PAL or NTSC? Because that's when you get down to demos and cycle specific stuff. That's a big
and also games.
Yeah, that's a big deal with that.
It is, and so it runs in its own special hybrid of the two. So that the reality is getting a 50 hertz signal at full HD accepted by many monitors is non-trivial to do. So we're more or less forced to run at 60 hertz. However, what we do is we do 60 hertz, but with enough cycles per raster line and all of the PAL raster lines, so that software designed for PAL shouldn't break. Because it's not going to run out of cycles per raster. It's not going to set a raster interrupt a raster line that doesn't exist on an NTSC machine. So if you like, it's 60 hertz PAL.
So if I had a game that would run on a PAL C65, it would not run faster on the MEGA65, because that's mostly the problem with the music, for example, running too fast.
So depending on the game, it may well be the music in the game runs at 60 over 50, so it's the 20% faster. We've been thinking about some ways to address that, but really the only way to do that is to get real 50 hertz output, because otherwise you get kind of strange video artifacts. So this is something that we're still trying to think of a really nice solution. But if we can get a video controller to reliably drive 50 hertz to HD TVs with a 50 like a 50p kind of mode, then this would be okay. But yeah, we're not sure that that's necessarily going to be possible, because we'd like to steer away from a 50i mode, because with interlace, then you get these horrible drag effects and things.
Yeah.
And it just looks ugly. Whereas the MEGA65, it looks beautifully liquid at real 60p 60 hertz progressive scan. So yeah, this is a little problem which is not so easy to solve, but I think, and Detlef and Andre can jump in if they like. It turns out actually that because things don't tend to break, the 60 hertz just kind of you don't tend to notice it after a while, and it just feels normal to use. And maybe it's sharpening your reflexes for some old games that were expecting 50 hertz when the game plays 20%.
That's exactly true. Yeah, indeed, I was playing Commando, and I found it to be a little harder than it was. But well, I kind of enjoyed it because it just feels like the old times, just a little more turbo. So in the end, I was playing it through and through like 7 times in a row, and at some point the grenades they hit the 99 limit, and then they are 0 again. So yeah, we do fine. I mean, it's not an issue we are addressing in a top priority at the moment.
Now, see, I grew up being American. I grew up with all of my music running 20% faster than it should. So that's fine with me, because that's how it's supposed to sound to me. Whenever I hear it at the proper 50 hertz, I'm like, that's not right.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember on the Nintendo 64 playing, I think Ocarina of Time, the PAL version, where you had to ride that horse Epona like, I don't know, 20 more hours just to get anywhere. And the PAL version was so not playable. I mean, I really prefer the 60 hertz versions of the game. They are more arcade style. But, well, of course, as Paul said, this will be addressed, but it's not the highest priority at the moment.
So actually, another thing, talking about speed and responsiveness, because we're making a direct physical interface to a real physical keyboard, we get rid of some of the really annoying things about emulation, or even like you can buy this. There's a couple of different brands of USB adapter you can put in an old C64 case to plug it into your PC or Mac, so that you can have real joysticks and use the real physical keyboard. And you go, oh, this is so lovely. Except they appear as a USB keyboard, and so you have like it's 15 or 20 millisecond delay on every key, and that's the minimum. And when you start trying to do diagonals on a joystick, then it doesn't come through simultaneous diagonal anymore. It is 2 events, one after the other. And Commando, for example, is practically unplayable using one of these little USB C64 keyboard things. Certainly it makes it really horrible to play.
Yeah, there's also the reason. That is also the reason why the USB version of the Competition Pro that was released for PCs wasn't very successful, because people said that pit stop and so on is really very hard because it's so much delayed.
Yeah, correct. And so it ruins the feeling, right? Like you're like, oh, this game that is really nice. I mean, it's funny, when my brother first got his first full-time job, the first thing he did was go to the local arcade game shop, and he bought a full stand-up arcade game of Gyrus. And so this was in our house for some number of years, and so I got to the point where I could reasonably reliably finish the entire game on the arcade. And on a real C64, I can do a pretty decent job. With one of these USB C64 keyboard interface things, that you can buy. I'm lucky if I can get to Neptune, and you can't get full points on the chance stages. Like it feels like someone has just chopped your legs off. It's really, really horrible.
Okay.
So we've purposely done a very different approach to that, where there is no USB between the physical keyboard and the computer, because then it wouldn't be an 8-bit computer either, right? So it is just direct lines into the chip. And so at 48 megahertz, of course, the latency on pressing a key or a movement can be as little as like 100 nanoseconds. So this is it's much, much sharper and faster than even on a real 64 or a 128, because of course on both of those the I/O is still at 1 megahertz. On the C65, the I/O can actually be at 3.5 megahertz, so it's kind of nice there. But we're 12 times faster again than that. So yeah, there is no problem at all. And when you play, even with the little prototype board that we have for that now, it's just like, it suddenly feels like you're back at a real 8-bit computer, and all of these horrible delays go away, and life is beautiful again.
You got your legs back.
Yeah, correct, and not just stitched on badly. It's like you have a professional Igor who has reattached possibly better legs than you had before. So this is all really nice. And again, it's from the preservation and heritage perspective, getting these little details right, so that when you sit down at it, all you're thinking is, I'm at a real 8-bit computer. When you succeed with this, then it's right. And so it's funny. So even the internal floppy drive that we emulate with an SD card in the MEGA65, we still preserve all of the normal loading routines from the stock machine. So you have at 48 megahertz, of course, it loads very fast, but you still have this kind of nice little pause where it's doing something on the disk, and because if it's totally instant, it doesn't feel right either. And so it's all these usability kind of things. I guess at the end of the day, we want the MEGA65 should feel like the iPhone does in the smartphone world, not like some cheap Android phone that does mostly the same things but doesn't have this beautiful, polished kind of feeling.
So you are doing the Mercedes of the retro computers, kind of.
Yeah, what Mercedes was in the 80s. Let's put it like that.
That's right. When they made nice beige cars.
Yeah. So let me ask Andre, actually, what did you have in mind to make sure that this won't be a failure? I mean, as you know, there are a lot of other products like the Vapid and all the other stuff that totally failed, and now that that there was that DTV that was a success, but unfortunately all those computers, all those Commodore computers in the past that were a success, they are not sold anymore. I mean,
but also
DTV
and
Commodore 1.
To interrupt you, also though, those computers that were coming out that were failures, the Webbit and whatever the other ones were, they slapped the Commodore name on it, and it had nothing to do with what Commodore was. And this I see more as like the opposite. Like they're not necessarily slapping the name on it, but they're making something that is accurate to what.
Yeah, exactly. You're perfectly right with that. So we want to get the real Commodore feeling back, and I think this will be the true difference to other projects that are out there, that we are bringing in a machine, also with all the details as Paul just outlined, that brings you back this real 8-bit feeling of the 80s. And you will be seeing a machine and really touching a machine. And you will also see the package, obviously, which we have in mind, that totally resembles the old times of Commodore in their biggest days. And also we have run this by the scene, the Amiga 30 party in Noise, for example, and have got some valuable feedback that we are all totally on the right track with that. And I think we have a great chance here to make this accessible to also a wider community than just the ones that we are talking to each day, obviously, right? So we will have the chance to bring the true Commodore spirit back with a machine that's totally capable of doing the things back from the past, but also doing newer stuff. And maybe this is also giving us the potential to preserve this digital heritage even better.
And will the machine be supported in like 5 or 10 years? Because that was actually the root of the question, because that's the problem with this thing that came out recently. After 10 years, they are no longer produced, no more software. Your machine is there somewhere in the cellar, but there's no new stuff coming out. So what about long-term support?
Yeah, so here is, it gets interesting, right? So this is, my day job is producing open source software for disaster communications, because I realized for that if it's proprietary, you have all of these problems and people can't adapt it and maintain it. If you do it open source, you're letting the community care for itself. So in fact, actually, it's cheaper and easier for you, for the producer, if it's done well. And, you're not creating any artificial scarcity of control for the community. And so the MEGA65, our hope is that we'll produce and sell physical complete units. But our intention is also that everything you need to make your own MEGA65 will be available online. So you can go and buy an FPGA or an FPGA board, however you want to do it. And you can put our open source code into that and make all the hardware interfaces. And you'll have your own MEGA 65. When we're all in nursing homes, trying to play Commando or whatever we end up doing at that time, that the next generation we can let's get this working on the next version of FPGA board, or let's crowdsource another production run. We really want to have this problem solved in a nice open way, and I think it gives more ownership to the community. And going back to what you're saying about all these other things that had the Commodore name on them, I mean, obviously it would be really nice if the guys that own the Commodore trademark kind of came to us and said, hey, we'd love to rent you the Commodore name so that this really can be the actual Commodore 65 that is released. That would be lovely. But we were working on the assumption that that's not going to happen. But instead, for us, it's more important that the designers of the Commodore 65, the engineers, and the other people who were involved say, yes, this is the true completion and outworking of the Commodore 65 project for 2016. And that for us, that's much more important, that the community, everyone can see, hey, yep, you don't need to stick the Commodore logo on something for it to be something from the 8-bit era. In fact, I think that, as you guys were kind of hinting at, the opposite has kind of been the case, that people go, if we put the Commodore brand on it, we can sell some stuff. And this is really sad, because I think it's not adding value to the Commodore brand for what value it still has. It's kind of slowly sucking the life out of the brand, whereas what we're doing really would help to rejuvenate the Commodore brand. Because, I mean, you can imagine the media that you would get if it came out that said, Commodore are releasing a new 8-bit computer. It is really an 8-bit computer. It plays all the old games. The media will just be fascinated by this because you go sorry, it's 2016, and here is this computer which, so it was delayed for 25 years in limbo while Commodore went bankrupt, but now 25 years late, we're finishing it off and it's coming out to market. I think this is a really interesting story for general news as well as for the more specific news outlets.
Speaking about that, when I was talking to Andre and Detlef on the Noise 30th Amiga anniversary, they told me that you didn't really reverse engineer from the source code, but you used a different method to get all the functions right of the Commodore 64. Mostly the way how it should be, rather than original reverse engineering. I don't know exactly. I don't remember exactly the details how it was explained to me, but
So I guess that background of the project, I owned a Commodore 65 for 15 or 16 years, and so I used to use it that was my main 8-bit computer that I used to use for much of that time, because it was just really nice, right? With the internal floppy drive and no piles of spaghetti chords and the clear display, and a little bit of extra speed. So I very early patched Turbo Assembler to use the 3.5 megahertz mode, and this just made assembling much nicer and faster. And so I've been thinking for a long time that I wanted to make a new Commodore 65, and also just to make an accelerated Commodore 64, because I had kind of I realized that there was this kind of nice way to make a really nice Commodore 64 accelerator that didn't have the cache coherence problems of the Super CPU, where the CPU can go fast or the display can be correct, right? This is kind of the two choices you have. So I realized on a real Commodore 64 that you can do this kind of funny trick where you tell a RAM that it's being written to instead of read from when the VIC-2 is reading RAM, and then you can just write the correct value in as the VIC-2 is reading it out. So it's kind of just-in-time write-back cache. And so I knew that this would work. I did some tests back in the late 90s on that, and thought, I'd still like to make an accelerator around that. But then eventually kind of these two projects merged, and it's like, no, I'll make one accelerator, which is an improved Commodore 65. And because I was quite familiar with how the machine worked, I basically just sat down and started implementing the VIC-3 as I knew it worked. And yeah, so I didn't look at the specs for the CPU other than the instruction opcodes, and also for the VIC-3, I just looked at the register maps that I had and started implementing it how I thought it would be a good way to implement it. And maybe this is not perfect, but yeah. So in that regard, it's very much a clean re-implementation. There is no intellectual property issues with that. And we just made it so that you can run an original Commodore 65 ROM, and it just works. In fact, you don't need to modify the C65 ROM at all for everything to work.
Wow. So you are working together with Dave Haney and Bill Hurd and RJ Michael. As I said, you got an approval from all those engineers back then at Commodore that the way you are doing it is correct.
I don't know that we have that. I think what we have is these guys all seem to be really enthusiastic about what we're doing. I don't want to put words in their mouth that they have not provided us. But yeah, so I guess our hope is, and the guys can jump in and correct me because they were there. I wasn't, unfortunately.
I'm just asking because my first experience when I entered the 30th Amiga anniversary at Noise was Dave Haney approaching me like, "Hey Joerg, maybe we should make a new Amiga. Maybe we should do a Kickstarter campaign and develop new Amigas. I would really like that." So I was like, okay, Dave Haney really wanted to have a new Amiga there. And that was the first thing he told me. So I got the feeling that they really want to be involved in something new again. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done that and told me.
Yes, they were quite excited about the MEGA65 project. Obviously, we had quite intensive discussions with them, with RJ Michael and also Haney, and it was really great to see how their eyes widened and they looked at this basically prototype machine of the MEGA65, and they got really excited about it. And as you have maybe seen, we also got their signatures from some of the Commodore guys on the machine, on the prototype machine.
Yeah,
which may be something that we will leverage later on when we go into the marketing phase of the whole project, right?
Yeah, plus we received emails from the C65 developers, and also I won't go into details, but some source codes and stuff that is really helpful, especially when we are going into more detail or like enhancing the basic or whatever we would like to do in this direction.
Yeah, and so I guess from my perspective, to summarize all of this, everyone that has connection to Commodore that we have been in touch with seems to be really, really enthusiastic. And I think when we get to the right time, we would love to talk with these guys again and say, hey, see if they're willing to offer some kind of on the record endorsement that we can use in the marketing, and again, can envisage that maybe we have interviews with these guys for media coverage at the time. I think that there's a whole pile of things that we can look at there that I think that would be really fun for those guys, as I say, to be involved in something new from that era that they have fond memories of, and to help us create something for all the community, which is just really nice and really amazing and really authentic.
So when is this planned to be available?
As soon as we have it finished.
Yeah, that's the word.
Well, so can I get a MEGA65 for Christmas?
Yeah, but we don't know which Christmas.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Or to put it another way, if you want it for this Christmas, we don't know how much it will cost you yet.
Yeah, that's another thing. That's another thing. That's something I heard a lot at the MEGA anniversary party in Noise, which was mentioned a couple of times here. That a lot of people were telling me like, this MEGA65 is very nice, but I'm not a developer. I don't know how to put this thing together myself or apply the software to it or the FPGA contents. So I bet a completely running machine, completely done, will be very expensive. I can probably not afford that. So that is something that a lot of people fear, because that is what kind of happened with the new Amigas that were also presented at the show, that people told me, it's nice to have new Amigas, but it's too expensive, I can't afford it. So that's, I guess, also another big problem.
Yeah, well, let me answer this this way. The more people are interested and want to buy it, the cheaper it will get. I'm totally with you that the new Amigas, despite how interesting they are really expensive. I mean, even as a collector, you really have a hard time getting one. And this is not where we want to go. But on the other hand, of course, we cannot offer a sophisticated thing like this for like 100 euros today. It's just impossible. Yeah, we would have to go in so large numbers that even I don't think there's enough retro freaks on the planet. But something fair in the middle. Yeah, we don't really want to earn money with it. We just want to spread it. We want to have people being involved. We want to have a scene, people who want to code for it, code demos, code games. That's the highest goal. We are a non-profit organization. We're basically doing it for fun. So we are not interested in actually earning money with it. Yeah. So I think from this point, it's a fair calculation. We'll make it, of course, in our own interest, in everybody else's interest, as cheap as possible. But I mean, it's 2016. Yeah, you cannot build a machine like this with a keyboard that is not built by anyone anymore, like a floppy drive and stuff like that, which is really hard to get ancient hardware. And also an FPGA, which you have to keep in mind would enable you to run like every computer and every console from the last 20 years on it. I mean, whoever wants to do it, they can do it. It won't be super cheap, but it has to be affordable for a wide circle of people.
Yeah, obviously we are quite cautious about the costs. Obviously, the final price is not set, but we are, as I said, really cautious on the pricing of the machine to make it as widely available as possible, and to make the community even bigger, and get this old Commodore spirit, as I said earlier, back.
Well, you look at even online at used, not even going into the used Commodore 65, because you're going to have to mortgage your house and sell your firstborn to even get one of those. But I mean, just even 20-year-old Amiga equipment is going for $300-400, and if I was I've been digging up my old Commodore stuff recently, and if I needed to get a newer machine, I think I'd rather spend a couple bucks extra to get something that's brand new and that's going to last, another 20 years down the road, than spending almost the same amount to get something that's 20 years old and may blow up next week.
Yes, and that's a healthy approach.
That's
It is.
true.
We certainly endorse that, right? But also, I mean, in terms of, like if you compare getting an old 64 or 128 compared to the MEGA65 when it's available, if you have a stock 64, you still have this problem of how do you get the software on and off? Where are you going to buy blank disks? Or do you use one of these little IEC adapter things? There is this whole extra complication. Whereas the MEGA65, apart from the fact that it will have 3.5-inch disks that maybe some people still can directly copy data with, it will have 100 megabit Ethernet, and it will have the micro SD card, and it will be much easier. We want to remove the annoying barriers to making it fun to use and on the first day, compared with with the other options. So and it, again, sort of on the price thing, one of the things. We started the project using an FPGA, which was and still is quite expensive because it was the latest generation, but it was the first FPGA that could actually implement this kind of machine directly. So the RAM that we're using for it is RAM inside the FPGA. So this is how we can have 192 megahertz, like it's 5 nanosecond RAM for this thing, so that it really can be an 8-bit computer. But we know that history tells us that FPGAs get cheaper over time. The previous generation is now like $10 US, whereas this current generation is currently about $100 US for the chip. But we know at some point, actually already the next generation of FPGAs are out, and so that in time that will start putting a downward pressure on the price of the current one. And so to some degree it might be, and although I don't think this will come to pass. But if we kind of sat down and said, okay, we can produce it, but now if we do it today, the price is too high. But if we wait 6 months or 12 months before doing a large production run, that the price will come down 10, 20, 30, 40%, that this is also quite possible. So, we want to get it out as soon as possible, but at the same time, because we're non-profit, we don't have to recover costs in any specific time frame. It's all volunteer effort, right?
Right.
That's good.
So it's again one of the nice things about this being a social enterprise rather than a commercial enterprise.
From what I gathered at the meeting, there will be different versions of the machine, complete in different way, with case, without casing, and so on. Is that correct?
Not really. I mean, we aside from the open source thing that everybody can do whatever they want with it, of course, we are supporting mainly two different approaches. One thing is the final machine, as pointed out before, with a nice package and bringing back your 1982 Christmas. And the other thing is you can have the development board and put it inside like a C64 housing, or maybe the new ones, the transparent ones, whatever. You can just run it on your table without any case. So you can do anything, but it will be, of course, a lot cheaper. So we are trying to keep both of those aspects alive. Because we also need the people that don't have the money to buy the full machine, and but we want them to be able to participate and to use it, of course. I think these are the main aspects. Maybe you are talking about what I said in the talk, that there probably will be people that maintain their own versions, like. One version could, for example, be somebody removes all the Mega stuff because they want just a C65 replica, doing the exact same thing and nothing else. Yeah, we won't do that, but of course, I mean, it's open source. Whoever wants to do that, they can do it. Yeah, and we even give them the designs of the case, so they can print their own cases or build them from wood or whatever they want. We are we all have a scene background. Yeah, we are talking guys from Fairlight, we're talking guys from Triad here, etc. So I mean, everybody is invited anyways to join at any time, especially guys that are still busy doing retro stuff today. But I mean, we are not really new to this, and we have done other big projects before, which were sometimes they hurt a bit to finish. But I think this is what we stand for. So maybe it takes a little longer than we hope, maybe not, but we will get that done. I'm pretty positive.
Right.
Okay, so where can people find out about this?
Oh, it's obviously the main domain is MEGA65.org. If you Google for MEGA65 or use whatever search engine you like, it will be quite on top. And there's a forum as well, a very little one, but I mean, it's in place. It's MEGA65.net. So the org is the main page, like advertising or telling what we are doing. And MEGA65.net is the community page. And at some point, there will be a MEGA65.com where you can buy the machine, which is not up and running yet. It's redirecting to the org at the moment. So, yeah.
And you have a Twitter account and Facebook and so on?
Yeah, you find all those on MEGA65.org. And indeed, we're posting here and there on Facebook some news. And there's also a link to the MEGA, which is Museum of Electronic Games and Art page, where you can see quite high-res images of the second prototype. And you can see what we are doing, that we're non-profit. We're doing free education for children, coding for elementary school and stuff like that.
Great.
And of course, if any of the listeners happen to be in Adelaide in Australia, then they can come by the university where I'm based, and they can have a look at the gear that we work on for development there.
Wow! So you are pretty open for feedback.
Yeah,
open source.
Yeah, and people may even touch your devices. Nice.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I mean, talking about this thing of being open. I mean, it's for me, being involved in open source software development for a number of years now. I wouldn't do it any other way. Like it's really nice because you can work with community. It's very much more social rather than this kind of proprietary. Can end up you end up very isolated. So yeah, for us this is a really nice way to work, and so we're quite happy to engage with people. And of course, it means that people can contribute as well. We don't have to rely only on our own efforts.
Yeah, at this point, maybe again an invitation to everybody who's interested in 8-bit coding, whether they might be able to code C64 or be interested in C++, and of course FPGA design. Whoever's interested, they just can contact us over MEGA65.org, and we'll find them a place in the project.
Yeah, that's right. There's lots of interesting things they can do. I mean, there's not many other places you can have the chance to help write an 8-bit hypervisor, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and the other thing is that we have so many ideas. Yeah, we always need to prioritize them, and there's some nice stuff that is not being done at the moment because we are not enough people. So everybody will get really interesting topics, I think.
Cool.
Great.
And we'll put links to all that stuff in the podcast description so people can check you out and all that. And
yeah,
that'll be cool.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for the time, guys.
Yeah.
And we will certainly stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Our
Yeah.
pleasure.
Thanks.
Okay,
So-
take care. See you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye.
Those are the guys from the MEGA65 project. So what was your takeaway from the MEGA65 guys?
My opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's the hottest since ever.
Really?
If it's really to be as good as they promise, it's going to be.
Yeah, I like the idea of it because, again, you get to replace some of your aging stuff with potentially a new, fully compatible machine.
Yeah, and, well, as I said, the problem here is the price factor, which they take care of, because the biggest problem nowadays is that new Amigas and stuff, they are expensive.
Old Amigas are expensive.
So, no, I mean new ones. New
I know,
models.
but even the old ones are stupid expensive as well. So
yes, so if they can give the Commodore 65 a new living, a new reason to exist, more power to them.
yeah. I'm on board, and I'd pay a couple extra bucks to have it. Just if it could replace my stuff without needing to, if I could have a brand new system to work and not have to, because all you can get now is a used 64 or 128 or whatever. There's no such thing as a brand new one that's never been used before.
Because of the ships mainly.
Right, yeah. Again, you can find them over at the website, which is MEGA65.org.
.net and .com.
Well, .com isn't there yet. It will be. You can also find them on Facebook and Twitter. Just search around, and the Twitter and Facebook is on the MEGA65.org page, as well as the LinkedIn and the Google Plus and all that fun jazz. Us, you know where to find us. Sceneworld.org is where issues are and video interviews and stuff. You can find our YouTube channel there through there. The Twitch stuff is through that. So just go there, find us. My website is just West of Hell. I'm on Twitter at Arthur J. Heller and some other things. Joerg is over at nafcom.eu, and he is nafcom on Twitter.
Yes, and we are actually, because there was some confusion in the past, we are on Twitter, scene_world. And our YouTube, just to make it complete, is youtube.sceneworld.org. And if you want to see us live, make sure you subscribe and enable notification on Twitch at twitch.tv/sceneworld, and then you get an email or a notification on your iPhone or Android device when we go on the next time.
Yes.
Righty.
All right, well, until then, I'm AJ. He's
Yeah.
Joerg.
Hear you then. Bye-bye.